The stars burned quietly above the planet Venthera. From orbit, it looked peaceful, glowing with blue seas and silver clouds. But below, nothing was calm. Cities had fallen. Fire ruled the skies. And the last of the human resistance had been crushed. At least that's what they thought. Commander Yelvira stood tall on the bridge of the Royal Dreadnought. Her blue skin shimmered under the flickering lights. She wore battle armor laced with gold and crimson veins. Her sharp eyes stared at the final message blinking on the screen. Human base eliminated. No survivors. A quiet smile tugged at her lips. She turned toward the window, watching the burning wreckage of the last human ship falling through the Ventheran atmosphere. The flames danced like a funeral pyre, and her crew cheered. She raised her hand for silence. A whisper of satisfaction passed her lips as she spoke to the galaxy. Finally. The last human is dead. Every soldier in the command chamber bowed. The centuries of war, the fear of Earth's unpredictable warriors, the endless ambushes and sudden uprisings, all of it was over. The human threat had ended. Or so it seemed, unknown to them, far below their orbiting vessel, deep inside the half-destroyed human corvette drifting in the flames. Something moved. A figure, breathing, clinging to metal with bloodied hands. His skin was burnt, his armor cracked, but his eyes were wide open, and his heart still beat with fury. His name was Cale Mercer. Last of the Vanguard. He hadn't died in the attack. He had been buried in it. And now, he crawled through the broken ship, dragging a fuel rod behind him. One arm was useless. The other gripped a rope tied to a heat shield panel. He stared at the orbiting dreadnought through the firestorm. His teeth clenched in pain, but he grinned. He remembered everything. The betrayal at the truce meeting. The Ventheran attack on his team while they slept. The smiling face of Commander Yelvira as she fired into the human command deck. She had looked straight into his eyes before the explosion buried him. Now, she stood above, safe in her royal ship, celebrating his death. But she had made one mistake. She didn't check the wreckage herself. She didn't see him crawl out. She didn't know the heat shield was meant to fly again. Cale tightened the straps around his body. The panel groaned under his weight as he dragged it to the launch rail. His breath was shallow. Flames licked at the airlock doors behind him. The last auto-launch program blinked to life as he hit the cracked screen with his elbow. In orbit, Yelvira stepped forward. The ship's sensors detected nothing unusual. Just debris and dust. Her crew began preparing a victory broadcast. She raised her arm to address the galaxy. Behind her, the view window flickered and a shadow moved across it. A shape burst into view. A heat panel, half melted, riding a shockwave from the ruined ship. And on it, a human. Arms stretched, hanging on with one hand. Blood streaked his face, but he was alive. And he was smiling. Yelvira froze. Her lips parted in disbelief. The chamber went silent. Officers turned toward the window. Outside, the last human hadn't died. He had survived. And now, he was riding a firestorm straight toward her command ship. She stepped back as alarms began to scream. A soldier reached for weapons control, but it was too late. The human had already reached the outer hull. His plan wasn't to fight. Yet, it was to remind them of something older than war. You never declare a human dead until you see the body burn, and even then, be sure it's not a decoy. Cale looked through the glass, locking eyes with the alien who had betrayed his people. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence said it all. The emergency lights on the Ventheran flagship began flashing red. Internal systems scrambled to respond. None of them were programmed to stop a human riding on burning debris. The ship AI, I stuttered for a moment, trying to understand the situation. Yelvira stood frozen. She couldn't look away from the man hanging outside her command window. His body was bruised, burned, and bloody, but he was alive. That detail tore through her like a blade. Her lips moved, but no words came out. She had ordered his death herself. She had approved the orbital strike. She had declared him the last human. Now that same human stared into her soul, using nothing but silence and a blood-stained grin. Officers around her panicked. Some called for weapons. Others tried to seal the outer deck. But none dared fire on the glass with their commander. Standing in front of it, a single wrong blast would depressurize the chamber and kill them all. Cale watched their confusion. His heartbeat slowed as he braced himself. The ship's energy shields were still partially open. He swung his body forward and kicked toward the emergency lock panel near the outer ring. He only had one chance. The force of his motion smashed his foot into the lock. Sparks flew. The door hissed and opened just enough to let him swing inside. The vacuum pulled him violently. He crashed into a control beam, cracked his shoulder, and rolled across the deck. Soldiers turned at the noise. Guns raised. Cale raised both hands, then reached to his belt. Smoke drifted from his skin. His armor fell apart in chunks. But he wasn't here to surrender. He was here to send a message. He pressed a button, and a hologram lit the room. It showed the final Earth transmission. Children in underground bunkers. Scientists building escape pods. A voice played over it, his own voice, recorded minutes before the attack. If I survive, they'll regret ever thinking we were extinct. The chamber stood still. Even Yelvira didn't speak. The image of human children hiding in rubble played across every screen in the room. No threat, no weapon. Just proof that Earth was not gone. That their war crimes had been seen. Then came the second message. A signal bouncing through the galaxy. Cale had triggered it the moment he entered. The dreadnought. It spread from their ship like wildfire, caught by relays, satellites, and abandoned drones still floating in deep orbit. Every alien system nearby would now see the footage, see the human who lived, and question every death report they'd ever written. The war wasn't over. The galaxy had been lied to. And worse, humanity had survived long enough to remember. Yelvira's voice finally returned. It came in a whisper, cold, uncertain, full of cracks that hadn't been there before. She stepped forward slowly, eyes never leaving him. You should not be alive. Cale wiped blood from his mouth. He limped as he stood fully upright. His body shook, but his gaze was firm. He didn't raise a weapon. His words were weapon enough. You left me to die, but you didn't watch me die. That's your mistake. The guards aimed, waiting for orders. But Yelvira hesitated. She saw something deeper. It wasn't just survival, it was warning. If he survived that wreck, others might have too. And if even one more human lived, the galaxy hadn't won. Her pride battled with fear. Centuries of hatred clashed with one moment of doubt. The last human had not burned, he had risen. And now he was inside her command deck, making her question everything she celebrated just hours before. And for the first time in her decorated military life, Commander Yelvira did not know what to do next. The guards surrounding Cale waited for the order to fire. Their weapons hummed with tension. Fingers twitched over triggers. One glance from their commander would end the man standing before them. But that glance never came. Yelvira stared at Cale like she was seeing a ghost. Her lips were slightly parted, breath caught halfway. It wasn't fear of him as a warrior. It was fear of what he meant. His presence shattered the illusion they had built. The war was supposed to be over. His death had been broadcast to the higher courts of the Galactic Assembly. His ashes were claimed as a trophy. But now he stood here, wounded yet proud, breaking. Through the lies of 100 systems, Cale noticed her hesitation. It was brief, but enough. He moved slowly, deliberately, stepping over broken glass and a scorched floor. His foot dragged slightly, but he didn't fall. He didn't speak until He was close enough for only her to hear. You saw a burning ship and called it a grave. But you never opened it to check. Yelvira didn't respond. Her jaw tensed. She waved her hand, and the guards lowered their weapons. They obeyed, confused. No one questioned her order, but none of them understood it. Cale's body swayed. The pain was growing worse, but his spirit held strong. He had come this far not to die, but to expose the truth. And now, standing in the enemy's command deck, he was doing exactly that. Yelvira gestured toward the center table. A large circular console glowed in the middle of the room. Holographic maps floated above it. The entire galaxy shimmered in silver lines. Red marks represented human losses. But now she noticed one of them blinked green. You weren't the only one, were you? Cale didn't answer. He didn't need to. That blinking green light was far from Venthera. It pulsed in the shadows of a broken moon. It was a signal. A heartbeat, not loud, but alive. Her fingers tapped the edge of the table. She zoomed in. The signal was old, but stable. One transmission every hour. Simple and silent. But it confirmed everything Cale's presence had already said without words. You've been hiding, waiting, watching us count our victory while you rebuild. Cale looked at the projection, then back at her. His voice was low and steady. He wasn't threatening. He was simply stating reality. A truth more powerful than any gun. We didn't start this war. But we learned how to survive it. The chamber remained silent. The crew stood like statues. Each word fell heavy, like weights dropped into water. Ripples of unease spread among them. Their enemy wasn't gone. He had learned to hide better. Yelvira leaned over the map. Her mind raced through reports. Images, timelines. Everything now seemed uncertain. If one human had made it back, then more could have. The ruins they once celebrated might be hiding the seeds of something worse. Resistance. Cale saw the shift in her eyes. He recognized it. She wasn't looking at him like a prisoner anymore. She was looking at him like a warning sign. Not a survivor, but a prophecy. You came here to die. Why now? Cale reached inside his cracked armor and pulled out a small device. It pulsed blue. He placed it on the console gently. No explosion followed. No alarm rang. Just one slow-growing circle on the galactic map. A countdown. When the time runs out, everyone will know the truth. I didn't come here to kill. I came to show you what's coming. The light grew across the map. Data streams activated. Codes unlocked. Old satellites and probes blinked back to life. It was a cascade, pre-planned, precise. Cale didn't need to lift a weapon. The galaxy would do the lifting for him, and all Yelvira could do was watch it begin. Asterisk. The countdown on the console moved slowly. Each second that passed was a reminder that something was coming. No one in the room dared move. Even the guards. Watched the glowing map with uneasy silence. Yelvira's eyes locked on the growing pulse stretching across the galaxy. It started at a single point, but new signals began answering it. They were faint and old, buried beneath systems once declared lost. Now they blinked alive again. The lie was collapsing. Everything she had stood on for decades was crumbling under the weight of this truth. The humans hadn't been wiped out. They had scattered, they had hidden. And now they were calling each other back. Cale leaned on the table, breathing through clenched teeth. His injuries throbbed with every heartbeat. But the look in his eyes was calm. It wasn't revenge he brought. It was revelation. And that was far more dangerous. Yelvira clenched her fists. She couldn't allow this to spread. Not now, not after years of propaganda. She slammed her hand on the table and shouted for command override. The console blinked red. Access denied. Cale had locked it from the start. You came here to show me this, to make me watch. But you won't live long enough to see the result. He met her gaze. I already have. You're watching it now. Behind her, the crew shifted. Some looked away. Others stared at the map like it was a ghost returning. They had believed the war was over. That peace had been earned. But now they felt something they hadn't felt in years. Doubt. Elvira moved toward Kale, slow and steady. Her armored boots echoed against the steel floor. "What did you send? Coordinates? Codes? Weapons caches?" Kale didn't answer. He just nodded toward the blinking pulse expanding across the stars. That was his answer. The message wasn't a call to arms. It was a call to memory. A reminder that humanity never needed a fleet to win, just time, and time was running out for her empire. "You think this will change anything? You're still alone." "You're still one." Kale shook his head. "Not one." First, that word hit. Harder than any weapon. First meant others. First meant leaders would rise. First meant the tide had not stopped, it had only pulled back. Elvira drew her sidearm and pointed it at his head. Her hand was steady, but her eyes weren't. "I can still end this. If you die before it completes, maybe it fails." He stared down the barrel. Blood dripped from his lip, but he smiled. "Maybe. But what if it doesn't?" Her finger hovered on the trigger. Every fiber in her screamed to pull it. But her silence cost her more than hesitation. Behind her, a console officer gasped. One of the distant signals had stopped blinking and turned solid blue. "They've reactivated something," the officer whispered. Elvira spun around. On the map, one of the forgotten human outposts had gone fully online. It had been dark. For decades, no life, no energy. But now it was live again. Not a broadcast, a beacon. Her hands trembled. She turned back to Kale but found no mercy in his eyes, only quiet strength. He didn't gloat. He didn't speak. He just watched her. Realized that the story of humanity wasn't finished. It was just on the next chapter, and she wasn't the one writing it anymore. The reactivated outpost was no longer just a signal on the map. It was transmitting live data across the grid. Its systems were ancient but sharp. They spoke in the old human code, fast and encrypted. And they weren't speaking to Venthera. They were speaking to each other, to others like them. Abandoned human stations buried under ruin, black site vaults, listening posts hidden in asteroid fields. Places thought lost to time now answered the call like bones rising from deep earth. Elvira's officers rushed to intercept the transmissions. They tried to block the signals, jam the frequencies, shut down the console. Nothing worked. The code was adapting, bending around their efforts like water on stone. Kale leaned against the table, watching the panic unfold. His body ached, but his eyes didn't blink. The Empire had believed it destroyed everything. They never thought to erase what couldn't be seen. Now that oversight was unraveling centuries of false peace. She turned back to him. "You're not broadcasting war. You're broadcasting memory." "That's what this is," he nodded. "The galaxy forgot what we were." I reminded it. Another signal lit up. This one closer to their own border. The outpost on the icy moon of Krathian. That base was believed to have collapsed in an avalanche, but now its pulse was strong. And it wasn't just sending, it was receiving. One of Elvira's lieutenants stepped forward. "Commander, if this spreads, the other species will question our claims. They'll demand investigations. They'll see we lied." "They already see it," Kale said quietly. The screen shimmered again. A message began scrolling down the center. Not a threat, a list. Names of colonies, lost transports, civilian research centers. Human stations marked as destroyed in official logs now marked themselves as active, and for each one, a timestamp. Proof that they had been functioning for years without the knowledge of the Council. That meant only one thing. The Council never won. It just stopped looking. Elvira's grip tightened around her weapon. Why now? Why wait until we believed it was over? Kale took a slow breath. Because you needed to see it crumble, not from war. From truth. The crew didn't know where to look anymore. Their training had never prepared them for this. Not for a silent resistance. Not for a war fought through ghosts and data. Not for a man who didn't carry a bomb but became one. The countdown reached 0. A final pulse rippled across the map. All remaining stations blinked at once. Then, a burst of information filled the chamber. Visuals, logs, holograms, evidence of every strike. Venthera had denied. Every orbital bombing, every treaty violation, every slaughter of human settlements under the guise of war. It was all there, unfolding. Before their eyes, raw, unedited, impossible to ignore. Yelvira's expression broke. She looked older in that moment. Her armor gleamed under the red lights, but her face sagged with realization. Her empire's image wasn't shattering from attack. It was being pulled apart by its own reflection. This will ruin us. Kale stood straighter, his breath shallow. Blood still leaked from under his armor. But he stood tall, not with pride, but with purpose. No, this will reveal you. What happens next is your choice. The chamber fell silent again. Outside the flagship, the stars remained unchanged. But the space between them now carried whispers. Stories returning to those who had forgotten. And the human who was supposed to be dead was the one who brought them back. Yelvira remained silent as the truth echoed across the bridge. Her empire's greatest victory had turned into its greatest exposure. What they thought was history had become living evidence. And the human standing before her had delivered it without a single weapon fired. Kale did not move. He let the room carry the weight. The lights flickered. The map kept pulsing. The sounds of incoming transmissions filled the air. Each one carved deeper into the Empire's mask, exposing more of what lay beneath. The crew whispered to each other, unsure whether to act or freeze. Their training said he was the enemy. Their screens now said he was the survivor. And between those truths, something inside them began to fracture. One soldier lowered her weapon completely. Another took a step back. It was happening not from fear, but from shame. Kale didn't lecture them. He didn't need to. Their guilt was their punishment, and it grew heavier by the second. Yelvira took a long breath. She was a commander of fleets. She had won wars. But this moment rattled her more than any battle. She had believed in the lies so long that truth now felt like poison in her veins. "What do you want?" she asked at last. Kale looked at her and spoke slowly. "Not revenge. Not blood, just memory. So your kind can never pretend again." She turned away from him. Her eyes locked on the galactic projection. Dozens of systems now marked active. Civilian colonies that were never part of her military reports. Children who had grown up in bunkers. Scientists who had kept silent just to stay alive. It was no longer just about Kale. He was the voice of all of them. The face that stood while others hid. The signal that woke a silent history from its grave. If we acknowledge this, the galaxy will turn on us. If we deny it, we lose what remains of our name. Kale didn't answer. It wasn't his problem. She had written the script. Now she had to read the consequences. The communications officer turned from his panel. "We're receiving calls from allied fleets. They've seen the data. They're demanding a council meeting." Another officer added. "Several ambassadors want confirmation. They claim this information was buried. That we violated peace accords decades ago." Yelvira's face hardened. "Because we did." Silence fell again. Her confession wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. It simply existed now, like a crack in a dam too wide to patch. Her people heard it. So did Kale. He didn't smile. This was never a victory to celebrate. "I will not run from this," she said firmly. He nodded. "Then maybe the next war doesn't have to be a war." A long pause held between them. Her fingers brushed the console. She accessed the internal network and overrode the fleet's censorship protocols. For the first time in her rule, she broadcast unfiltered truth, the footage, the names, the maps. She sent it all. Not just to her people, but to every system once allied with her empire. She exposed herself to collapse. And yet, in doing so, she took a step towards something rare in war. Accountability. Kale watched the feed begin. The damage had already been done, but now something else had started. Something slower, quieter, but more powerful than force. A galaxy waking up from lies, one fact at a time, and in the center of it stood a man who was supposed to be dead. The truth spread faster than the Empire could contain it. By the time Yelvira's broadcast reached the outer systems, debates had already begun. Forums lit up. Alliances grew tense. Old records were dragged out and matched with the newly exposed human data. Some called for her resignation. Others praised her for admitting what no other leader had dared. But none denied the impact of the transmission. What had started as a celebration of humanity's extinction had become the day. The galaxy questioned itself. Inside the command deck, the air felt heavier. The crew no longer looked at Kale with contempt or orders in their eyes. Now they watched him with uncertainty, respect, maybe even guilt. He was no longer the last of a dead race. He was a witness who never stopped watching. Yelvira stood in the center of the room, shoulders square, eyes fixed on the star map. Every minute, another outpost answered. Some messages were simple pings. Others included full transmissions. Children singing old Earth songs, survivors sending names, histories, coming back to life. She had spent her career trying to erase them. Now she was surrounded by their voices. And for the first time, she was listening. Do you think your people will forgive us? She asked without turning. Kale closed his eyes for a moment. Forgiveness isn't what we want. It's acknowledgement, dignity, the right to exist without being hunted. The console beeped again. One signal from a system long forgotten. Vega R13. It had been one of the first human colonies attacked during the early phase of the war. Reports claimed it was vaporized in a solar bombardment. But now, the beacon pulsed strong. Yelvira leaned forward and opened the stream. A woman's face appeared. Weathered but bright. Human. Her eyes widened as she saw who had answered. She whispered Kale's name with disbelief. Behind her, dozens of others stood in the background, alive. They had waited years, decades, surviving in silence, believing no one would ever know they existed. Now their silence had ended. And Kale, standing on the flagship of the very empire that hunted them, had become their voice. Tears lined his eyes. He nodded toward the screen. You're not alone anymore. The woman covered her mouth. Others wept behind her. Yelvira stepped back. Her empire's narrative had just shattered completely. Not by an army, but by a single survivor who refused to stay buried. What happens now? She asked him. Kale looked around the bridge. Now you have a choice. Either step aside and let the truth spread, or try to stop it and watch your walls fall faster. She knew he was right. She had seen it already begin. There was no way to silence the outposts. No way to rebuild the lie. The only question left was whether she would cling to her power or rise above it. The chamber doors opened. An incoming delegation from the Galactic Assembly had docked. Their faces were unreadable. Their ships had received the transmission. They had come not for battle, but for answers. Kale stood still, letting them see him. His injuries were still visible, but so was his strength. He represented something bigger than one man. He represented memory that refused to die. Yelvira faced the delegates. I have much to say, but I won't speak until he does. The delegates nodded. Cameras blinked. 1,000 systems tuned in to hear the words of the man who was supposed To be dead. Kale stepped forward, voice steady, gaze unwavering. And the galaxy listened. Asterisk. Kale stood before the galactic delegates with firelight from the console, flickering across his bruised face. The chamber was quiet. No one interrupted. No one dared look away. This was no longer a meeting of war or strategy. It was a reckoning. He didn't deliver a speech filled with blame. He didn't shout. His voice was calm, scarred by loss, but grounded by survival. Every word he spoke was not just for humans. It was for all species who had ever been silenced and erased. You celebrated the end of us. But we were never gone. We were buried, not broken. We remembered while you forgot, and now the truth has risen. Not to destroy you, but to remind you that history lives as long as one heart keeps beating. The delegates listened. Their eyes flicked to Yelvira, who stood behind him without protest. She hadn't left. She hadn't drawn her weapon again. Her silence was her admission. And her presence beside him was her surrender. Kale continued. We don't come seeking war. We've had enough. But we won't be erased again. The galaxy will remember that humans endured. And from now on, we speak for ourselves. One of the delegates, a tall reptilian figure from the Kelver, stepped forward. If we acknowledge your survival, your suffering, what do you want from the assembly? Kale turned to face him directly. Respect, recognition, protection for the colonies that still live, and the right to rebuild without the fear of another. Silent purge. The Kelver bowed his head slightly. Other delegates nodded. It wasn't official yet, but the shift had begun. What Kale had triggered was more than political. It was spiritual. A moment where truth outweighed legacy. Across the galaxy, footage of this broadcast spread faster than any ship could travel. On forgotten moons, human children stood taller. On ruined planets, survivors stepped out of hiding. In quiet bunkers, tears ran down old cheeks as they heard the voice of the man who had lived. The empire of silence had ended. Yelvira stepped forward, not as a commander, but as a witness. She addressed the assembly. We built our power on denial. That ends today. I will answer for it. But I also stand here to say this. If one human could survive and bring down our illusion, imagine what their future will be when we stop standing in their way. No one clapped. There was no celebration, but there was understanding. And that was stronger than any applause. After the meeting, Kale was offered medical aid and sanctuary. He refused a title. He didn't want medals. He requested one thing only, that the records remain open, and the story never be buried again. He returned to the old Earth shuttle they recovered from deep orbit. He sat in silence, watching stars move past the cracked window. For once, they didn't feel cold. They felt like home. The galaxy would never be the same. The last human had lived. And in doing so, he proved that memory was more powerful than any fleet. From that day forward, no planet dared speak of extinction with pride. No empire declared a race gone unless they searched every shadow. And in classrooms built across human colonies, children repeated one promise every morning before study began. We are the children of the forgotten. But we forget nothing.